Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. This next alteration is one of my favorites and doesn't affect the sleeve at all, which is the main point. Say you'd like a little bit more across the bust and or the upper back, but you don't want to add to the side seam under the arm because that will change the sleeve dimension. I see this a lot. Often I have muscular students who spend a lifetime swimming or exercising and have very broad backs and need a little bit more room without affecting the sleeve dimension. And they don't want to add to the side seam since it would change the armhole and sleeve. Likewise, I see students who just need a squish more across the front but don't want to increase the dart or even add a dart. So this alteration, which does not affect the sleeve, is really handy. For ease of illustration, I'll work with the back of the jacket, but this alteration can work on both the front and the back of the garment, or both, depending on where you need the most extra ease. The first step is to trace the center back or front, the neckline, and the shoulder. And I'll be tracing the size blue. Do not trace the armhole or side seam at this time. If there isn't a dot or mark on the shoulder and arm's eye or armhole seam line, make one to mark that intersection. Place a small mark on the blue cutting line at the top of the side seam to indicate the current placement of the edge of the armhole. Place a push pin in the dot that marks the intersection of the shoulder and armhole or arm's eye blue seam line. This will be the pivot point for this alteration. The next step is a bit counterintuitive. Students usually get the pivot direction wrong. I can best describe the direction that you need to pivot by telling you to pivot in the opposite direction you think. So let's add an extra inch or 2.5 centimeters across the upper back of this jacket without changing the sleeve or armhole. Since this pattern is only half of the back, presumably you would be flipping it for the second half, you only need to increase the back dimension half of what you ultimately want. I'm going to pivot my tracing away from the master pattern a ½ inch or 1.2 centimeters by moving the tracing away from the side seam cutting line towards the center back. Rotate that little mark that you made on the tracing, indicating the original cutting line under the arm, 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters away from the master pattern cutting line. Now I can trace the armhole, but it's in a different position. Don't forget to add the back armhole dots and mark the new placement of the cutting line under the arm. Return the tracing to its original position, lining up the center back and grain lines. You can clearly see how the armhole is still the same size blue armhole, although I've traced it in red, but now it's in a different location, adding an inch or 2.5 centimeters across the entire upper back without changing the armhole. With the tracing now in its original position, join the new mark, which I traced in red, indicating the top of the side seam cutting line with the hip area of the pattern. If you want more in the hip, this would be a good time to add it. If you are working with the front and dealing with a bust dart, check out the video on combining sizes when a bust dart is in the way to help connect the underarm to the hip. Now, this alteration can also work in reverse. By pivoting the tracing in the other direction, you can take out extra fullness across the bust or across the back. Now, we can use that same technique to create a different size armhole and sleeve. Let's say you want to trace the blue body, but really want a fuller sleeve. Start by creating the steps I outlined previously, tracing the center back or front, neck, and shoulder line. Mark the shoulder dot for the intersection of the blue shoulder and armhole seam line. Mark the top of the size blue cutting line for the side seam. Shift the shoulder dot for the size blue to the next size up, which is a size orange. Overlay the two and insert a push pin. Again, this will be the pivot point. Pivot the mark that you made to indicate the size blue cutting line until it reaches the size orange cutting line. Trace the size orange armhole. Don't forget to add the double dots indicating the back of the armhole, and since you're tracing the orange armhole, you would select the orange dots. Return the tracing to its original position. You can see the orange armhole in the blue body. Which means that you can trace the orange sleeve and it will fit the orange armhole. You'll want to repeat these steps to do the same thing to the front. But what if I wanted to put one armhole sleeve from one jacket into a different jacket body? We discussed this possibility of putting the 100 sleeve onto the 200 jacket body when we talked about choosing your size and using my daughter's body as a guide. Here I've traced the 200 jacket body in size blue. I'm going to overlay it into the 100 jacket body and trace the blue armhole from it onto the 200 jacket body. I've drawn in the original 200 blue armhole, but we'll now redraw the 100 armhole, also size blue, but I'll use a different colored pencil so you can see the change. Maintaining the grain lines, line up the shoulder dot of the two blue patterns and trace the 100 blue armhole onto the 200 jacket body. Now you can trace the 100 sleeve in size blue and have a much roomier sleeve, but in the 200 jacket. Don't forget to repeat these steps for the front. Have fun with these techniques and have fun exploring how your size and shape can be custom fit with just a few tweaks of a flat pattern. And again, don't forget to try out your newly traced patterns in junky material first to make sure you did everything right. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.